Years ago, Brandon was a quiet, contemplative college student who was happy to be alone and focused on his studies. He preferred to blend in with the lively chaos of campus life by keeping his nose buried in books and going unnoticed. However, beneath his quiet exterior, there was a sharp intellect and a compassionate heart, qualities that few people realized until one autumn afternoon that would forever alter his life. There were golden leaves all over the paths, and the cold air smelled strongly of fall. Brandon had located a quiet area in the library and was getting ready. When Ellie entered his world like a ray of sunshine for an impending test, her magnetic presence, flowing hair, radiant smile, and effortless energy seemed to light up the room. Ellie wasn't just another student, she was an artist whose love of painting spilled out in everything she did, and their connection started out of the blue as soon as their eyes met. Ellie returned Brandon's shy, hesitant smile with a warmth that seemed like an invitation, and their brief exchange signaled the start of a relationship that would change Brandon's life in ways he could not have predicted. At first their interactions were quiet chats and tentative, shy looks, but eventually these small beginnings developed into something more. Long treks across campus and endless cups of coffee became part of their daily routine, as did late-night study sessions. Ellie brought out aspects of Brandon that he was unaware of. She was not only gorgeous but also witty, fearless, and had a contagious enthusiasm for life. To Brandon's surprise, Ellie felt the same way, and by the time graduation came, their relationship had blossomed into a spring wedding full of sunshine and hope. Ellie looked stunning in her wedding gown, and Brandon, who was never one for extravagant displays, could only marvel at how lucky he was to call her his wife. They started their married life together in a modest home, filling it with dreams, laughter, and priceless memories. For a while, their life together seemed like the ideal romance, but as with all tales, perfection has its limits. One evening at Jessica's birthday celebration, cracks appeared, and Ellie appeared strangely. As the evening wore on, Brandon's uneasiness increased when a stranger approached him with a mysterious warning that Ellie was in emotional danger. Not physical harm, but emotional vulnerability to a man named Stephen who was attempting to charm her. Brandon's eyes searched the room and eventually discovered Ellie and Stephen on the dance floor, their movements too synchronized, their connection too intimate. Lively's laughter was louder, her eyes sparkling with an energy that Brandon couldn't ignore. When they leaned close to whisper, Ellie's animated expression and Stephen's intimacy made Brandon feel jealous. What had once been Ellie's joyful laughter now felt like a betrayal, and he tried to ignore it by blaming it on his imagination or the alcohol. But when Ellie slipped toward the venue's back exit, her hurried steps and faraway gaze dispelled any doubt. "Where are you going?" Brandon asked, his voice full of emotion, and Ellie hesitated before answering, letting out a heavy sigh. "I needed some air." Brandon's heart raced as he followed her outside. When he caught up to her, Ellie looked startled but not completely surprised, with a hint of guilt in her expression. "I will return shortly," without being persuaded. After a moment of silence, Ellie revealed that she was going to Stephen's place. Brandon was shocked by her admission, but her composed demeanor only made it worse. "Do you realize what this may do to us?" Brandon's voice trembled in amazement as he said, "It's not what you think," her voice steady. "It's just one night. It doesn't mean anything." Ellie averted his eyes. She admitted, "I just need this to feel alive again," as her hands trembled and Stephen made her feel something she hadn't felt in years. "Everything will return to normal after tonight." Her words cut through Brandon like a knife, saying, "I'm not enough of you anymore." His voice broke. "Everything we've built together means nothing to you?" Tears filled Ellie's eyes, but her love remained strong. "This isn't about you," she said quietly. "We'll get over the fact that it's only about me tonight." Ellie begged, but Brandon's face changed from one of anguish and rage to one of steely resolve. "If you walk out that door, we're done," he said firmly. After one last, tearful look, Ellie paused, her hand hovering over the door handle, and then she went outside to discover something inside. Brandon's love for her was shattered, and it vanished into a pit of rage and gloom. Ellie returned the following morning, her face etched with regret. She begged for his forgiveness and insisted that her time with Stephen had been pointless, but Brandon was unmoved. His thoughts shifted to retaliation, promising to destroy her life piece by piece with accuracy. He first depleted their joint accounts, putting the money out of her grasp, and then he quietly poisoned their social circle by sowing. Friends who had once loved Ellie started to turn away from her due to rumors of her adultery and careless actions. Uncertain of what to believe, they eventually turned their attention to Brandon, who targeted her career, her greatest pride. Carefully crafted rumors and anonymous tips damaged her reputation, and the opportunity she had worked so hard for started to fade away. Life in ruins. Ellie was left perplexed, unable to comprehend why everything was collapsing, and Brandon's icy indifference greeted her every time she tried to rebuild. When she got home one evening, her eyes, she said, her voice weak and hollow, "Why won't you forgive me?" as tears streamed down her cheeks. Brandon's eyes met hers, his face unreadable. "You promised me one night couldn't ruin us," he continued in a steady, cool voice. "But it did, and now you're dealing with the fallout from that decision." As the weight of his words struck her, Ellie fell to the ground, her face crumpling in desperation as her tears reverberated through the silence. Brandon remained still, his heart hardened. As the days grew into weeks and Ellie's life continued to fall apart, he was thoroughly calloused by her deception and unaffected by her suffering. Her professional life collapsed, friendships waned, and even her family's encouraging glances became into icy stares. She was disappointed and trapped by her own actions, becoming a hollow shell of the person she used to be. Brandon was briefly satisfied as he saw everything, but a thought started to bother him. Would she suffer? Ever since the void she left inside of him, every strike Brandon delivered felt like a fleeting victory, but the emptiness inside him only made Ellie's suffering worse. Brandon's retaliation permeated every aspect of Ellie's life, contaminating everything she had previously treasured. The raw and obvious did nothing to mend his own wounds. Instead, he broke every aspect of her life, leaving a hollow void inside of him. The vibrant, spirited Ellie he once knew was gone, replaced by a frail shadow of the person she had once been, a celebrated artist who had been shunned by the very community that had once praised her talent. Brandon had made sure her disgrace was total, carefully crafting rumors that ruined her reputation. At first, Ellie resisted, seeking solace in smaller galleries in an attempt to rekindle old admirers of her work, but every door closed in her face, and the pity of those who had once praised her crushed her spirit even more. With nowhere else to turn due to Brandon's machinations, her family ultimately betrayed her. Her father, who had always happily mentioned her triumphs, quit contacting her after her mother, who had previously been her fiercest supporter, stopped doing so. Their rejection hurt more than any professional loss, leaving Ellie feeling totally alone and lonely. After taking everything from her profession, friends, and family, Brandon's campaign of vengeance was almost finished. Yet he felt no triumph as he looked back on her life. Despite all the suffering he had caused, he was still unhappy one evening when Ellie sat at the kitchen table with her hands shaking and her eyes vacant. "I don't know how much more I can take," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The emptiness inside him had grown even larger, fed by the very satisfaction he had sought to achieve. Brandon gave no answer, but as he stared at her broken form, a glimmer of doubt flickered inside him. She had ruined their marriage with her decisions, and he had made sure she paid the price. Ellie's betrayal had destroyed their relationship, but he had convinced himself that seeing her suffer would heal the wound she had caused. However, As he looked at the woman in front of him, it became clear that his quest for vengeance had only made his own pain worse, while a darker, more bitter part of him urged him to stop until she had nothing left, telling him that she deserved this. The conflict inside him raged, but he persisted down his destructive path over time, despite his waning resolve. Ellie's spirit had gradually dwindled. She had given up on her art, stopped trying to better her life, and withdrew from the world entirely. One evening, Brandon came home to find her packing a suitcase. "Where are you going?" he demanded, his voice sharp, without turning to face him. "I'm leaving. I can't do this anymore," Ellie replied, and his anger flared inside him. How dare she think she could walk away after all she had done? He had taken everything from her, and yet she still sought to flee, he asked. His anger halted just as he was about to lash out. For the first time, he saw her not as a woman who had betrayed him, but rather as someone who was completely broken. "Do you think leaving will fix anything?" he asked, his voice softened now with exhaustion. At last, Ellie looked him in the eye. Here, her words hit him harder than he had anticipated. He had won. He had torn her apart. But the victory felt hollow in destroying her. He had destroyed himself. "I loved you," he whispered, slipping out before he could stop them. Her eyes were filled with tears, but her voice remained steady despite her pain. "It's about surviving, Brandon. You've taken everything from me, Brandon. There's nothing left for me." "I understand that," Ellie replied with tears streaming down her face. "And I loved you too. But we are only remnants of the individuals we once were." For the first time since her affair, Brandon felt the full weight of his actions as she packed up her suitcase and left the house that evening, leaving him behind. The months he had spent planning her downfall had not eased his own broken heart, and her betrayal had changed him into a man who was angry and unable to forgive. As Brandon rummaged through her belongings, he discovered an incomplete painting of him that was alive and vibrant, capturing a version of himself that he no longer recognized. Tears welled up in his eyes as he stared at the painting, which served as a reminder of what he had lost, not just Ellie, but the man he once was. There was no UND doing the past, no way to repair what had been destroyed, but as he carefully placed the painting in the corner, he silently vowed to let go of the anger that had consumed him. This concludes the story. If you liked it, please leave a like. Ellie was gone, and with her came the opportunity to reclaim their love. But maybe in the ruins of their story he could start to rebuild himself. Their story was one of love, betrayal, and revenge, but at its core, it was also a story of the loss of two people whose choices irrevocably changed them. As Brandon sat alone in the house's silence, he decided to find peace, even if it meant going forward alone. Additionally, subscribe to the channel.